There's something that causes conflict all the time, and that's fear. So it doesn't matter what we're fighting about, there's fear behind it. Okay. Otherwise, we will not go into fight or flight. We won't be triggered, we won't be alarmed. So there's always something that frightens us.
Hello and welcome to Separate Bathrooms. We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. I am Daddo.
I'm Daddo. I'm excited about today. I'm kind of giggling like a little schoolboy because we're going to talk about relationship. Yeah.
For a change.
Why? Yeah. The question is, why do we fight the most with those we love the best? I guess that's why I'm having a little giggle, because you and I have been butting heads a bit lately.
Yes.
And it's uncomfortable, so that's where my uncomfortable giggle comes from.
Right.
You might remember in our very first couple session with the dear departed Reverend Brian, who married us. Right, that was our first couple session.
Oh, I guess it was actually, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
I would never have thought of that. But it was actually a group session.
Yeah, but we had one on our own first, and then he did the group. We had a couple of groups, with the plumber and remember him?
All
right, okay. So Reverend Brian forewarned us that the person we're going to hurt the most is our spouse. He didn't say fight.
No, he said hurt. Yeah.
I'm guessing the hurt often comes from an argument or a fight.
Yeah.
Today we've got Australian relationship therapist Lissy Abrahams, who has spent years exploring the question of why do we fight the most with those we love the best. She works in a treatment room helping clients and through her extensive research, and she's coming to share it with us.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing her tips on conflict resolution, because I think we can always have more help with that. She has a book called Relationship Reset. Let's bring her into the bathroom, Lissy Abrahams.
Lissy, welcome to the bathroom. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Now, we began this podcast over 100 episodes ago because we wanted to dive deeper into what makes our relationship work better, be kinder, more loving. And here we are with you today. You've got a book out, brand new, Relationship Reset. Now, I think Elle and I, we're like unconsciously resetting all the time. How important is it to consciously reset?
I think that's an awesome question. I haven't been asked that one before. I think we have to have our eyes on our relationship. Otherwise, it will just drift off in a direction where we have no intention of it going. So I think if all of us can become much more conscious of what we're doing in our relationship, how we're treating our partner, why we treat our partner in a particular way, I think that sets us up for much more success than if we just drift.
Do you feel like it's so much... you say that and I totally agree. And I think it's like the bane of most long-term relationships where it's like, oh, we just drifted apart. We don't have the same interests anymore. But do you think it's something that people feel like it's too much work to do and really it's not? Or do you feel like it is a lot of work?
I think it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think a really good marriage, a good relationship is a lot of work. I think some people just float together better, but I think we all need to become very conscious of what we carry and our expectations and ideas and opinions about relationships, because we keep putting that on our partner and they're often going to have a reaction to how we treat them or why we become reactive in certain ways. So I think it is work, and I think we need to see it as work, not this expectation of we fell in love and it's all so beautiful. I mean, that's lovely for 2 years, but let's get real. Once the hormones of all of that and the chemicals start sort of sliding away, we're left with someone who may leave a toilet seat up or doesn't hear the kids cry in the night. That's not what we want to call love, but we have to kind of keep on top of it all and keep communicating through it.
Yeah.
What does a reset look like? Can you give us an example?
So the thing I want people to understand the most in this book is that it's our individual journey into how we relate to our partner.
Oh, okay.
So the reset really is, how do I understand myself? Why am I so reactive? Because our partner's just being them. But why are we so reactive? What is it? What are my triggers? What sets me off? Why do I become a little firecracker? Or why do I start crying or sulking? What is it about me? Because that's in me that happens. My partner just might do something that triggers it in me, but it's not about them.
Yeah.
It's what's inside of me that's hooked at that moment, and I've become really reactive or wanting to flee or say I'm going to leave the marriage, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the more that we can reset and understand why do I do that and be really curious, not judgmental, but curious about why we respond the way we do and react the way we do, I think that's the reset, and having some tools to know what to do with that.
And is it as a psychologist, and I know you've deeply studied relationships, is that always going to take us back to our childhood? Is it always going to go back to either how we've been raised, what we've been demonstrated by our parents, or the traumas we've had? Is it always going to be taken back to that point?
Typically, yes. Yeah, because we've been encoded with so many different experiences in childhood, and these are micro moments, a lot of them. They're not a big deal. We don't always remember them, or we were too young to remember them, but they're inside of us, and we all have our own particular flavour of how relationships have been encoded inside of us. So some of us have more joyous and secure experiences, others of us don't at all, and that we might have been more lonely, more disregarded, or told we were disappointing. All of that will alter how we relate to our partner. So we really do need to know, because we're going to perceive them as a threat, like we did with our parents saying we were disappointing or giving us that look or raising their voice at us when we were children.
Absolutely. I grew up in a divorced household, but my mum and dad still lived in the same house, and they didn't talk to each other. So it was just a lot of silence. I never saw them fight, but it was just silence, like
Cold War.
the Cold War. And that is my go-to place all the time. And
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, when we get into conflict, or there's been an issue, my immediate reaction is to go, withdraw, close down, because I hate conflict anyway. I was never demonstrated a healthy way to have conflict, and my conflict that was demonstrated was silence. So it's been, as you know, I mean, he's like, oh really? Are you like that, honey? I'm like, you've been married to me for 30 years. You know I'm like.
Of course I know. Of course I know. I just wanted to hear you say it. And it's important for me to hear it articulated because then you go into your corner.
Yeah, and I do come out again.
Yeah, you do. You do come out again, but you do go into your corner, and I'm left going, what's going on? I'm going to go swimming.
That is such a great example, though.
Yeah.
I mean, what you two just described is a really great example of what happens for so many people.
Yes.
So yours is a flight response.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
other people fight. So I don't know, Cam, are you a fighter or a fleer?
Oh, God.
He's panicking.
I don't, What? Questions?
I don't know.
Questions?
Oh, sorry, you're meant to ask the question.
Yeah, no, but that's okay. I don't mind this. This is good.
Do you need to say, I never fight, honey? Is that what you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm a lover, not a fighter. No, I think I probably am more of a fleer. That's probably why we do get on, because we have stuck for 30 years. Because if I was a fighter, I'd be chasing her down to fight. Whereas I think I'm a fleer, but at the same time, when I flee, I go off into my cave and I do what you were talking about before, and that's a bit of self-reflection and go, instead of reacting to the situation, to respond to the situation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and what was I going to say? Because I do realise that it's our response to things that makes the reality. And so if we can, it's how we think about it. So some people might view something as being really awful, and other people might, from their perspective, no, it's not an awful thing. That's just life.
And what you're describing is your ability to start recovering once you've separated out. Your thinking brain is coming back online, your neocortex, because when we fight, it goes offline and we go into fight or flight. So you've both started fleeing, but in your downtime, you're not just sitting in there saying how horrible you both are, the other is, and why you can't stand each other and all of that sort of thing. You're thinking, what could I do now
Yep.
What are the next steps? How do we recover? And you're doing it individually, but you're recovering. So your thinking brain is coming back online, which means you're moving out of fight or flight.
Oh, okay.
And that's a really important process, because a lot of other people, they go into their flight, into the bedroom, or they leave the room, the house, they go for a walk, they get in the car. Some people go towards alcohol. That's also a flight response. Other things like that. But
I've ticked that box.
yeah.
I've done that. It doesn't feel very good the next day.
No.
But yeah, a few things like
You know
that.
that one, yeah. And so that is a form of flight as well, to numb it. But what you're both doing is reflecting, as opposed to what a lot of other people, if they've had different kinds of childhoods, they don't recover as quickly. And so they will sit in that space either thinking they're going to leave me. They can create stories based on their own childhood. Are they going to leave me? Are they calling the lawyer? Are they calling a friend and saying how horrible I am? Are they sad in there? It depends on what your childhood is, about what you do in that space. And for the two of you, there's been enough capacity to recover and then find each other again. So it's really important. It's great that you're doing that. It's healthy.
So you've written the book, but you also have a practice, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so how do you tell people? What do you say to someone who's doing that behaviour, who's actually not, who's more in the flight and taking off? And how do you counsel people in that way?
For me, it's very similar to those who are fighters. The fighters always look bad because they're out there and big and angry or saying horrible things and blaming. And I'm putting my hand up. I'm a fighter and a fleer. I fight and walk backwards out the door. So I'm great.
You drop the bomb and then
See ya. And then my partner will follow me. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm fleeing.
Get away from me.
He's like, let's resolve this. I'm like, no, I'm furious. So it's the same. If it's fight or flight, it's all the same mechanism that's happening. So the body is having all of these changes where there's increased cortisol, adrenaline that is surging through the body all of a sudden. I let them know. So it's psychoeducation. I let them know that their heart rate and their blood pressure have increased. So they're ready to fight the beast or run away from it. So you two run away from the beast, whereas others fight. But it's exactly the same mechanism that's happening.
Yeah.
And this is like animals in the wild. They're continuously making assessments. Is this beast something I can fight? If I can, I will. And if not, I will run. And so your bodies are doing exactly the same as someone who's doing fight or flight. And I ask people to try not to judge each other too much in fight or flight, because it's such a primitive response.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And we're just designed as we're designed. But saying that, the fighters can be pretty yuck. And I know that. I'm not always my best self when I fight. I'm not always kind. I'm not sensitive. I've got a name I can throw. And I do try and work on it. I think it's a lifelong endeavour for a lot of us, for the fighters. But they're just doing their version of fight or flight, their survival response.
Can fighters and fleers coexist in a relationship?
They can when they understand what they're doing, because otherwise they're just taking it really personally. So if Ali goes off and you're a fighter, just imagine, you'd be thinking, why is she walking away? That is so rude. And it's what we put on the situation and how we judge it.
Yeah, right.
So if you're not judging it and you're saying, oh, just give her 10 minutes, she'll be back out, we'll have a hug and get on with our day, that's fine. But if we're going in there saying, you always do this, and then there's the accusation that goes with it, it's the story we tell. And that story can be quite elaborate and off.
Well, maybe I'm a bit more like you. I have a bit of the fight in me, because I will have that I do take things personally.
The thing that you do, which is difficult for us, and I mean
who's us and who are you talking to?
You and I, because but often we can get to the point where we're laughing about it. Is that you have the most unbelievable ability across the board? That's not just with me, of putting your foot in your mouth. Like, it is, no one can dig a trench like Cameron Daddo. Like, it is uncanny, and to strangers, to dogs, to you name it, you're really good. Actually, you have gotten better at it lately. In the past, you have gotten better. But boy, you would do that.
Would I?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? What's that? How do you plug that into a fight or flight thing?
Well, what happens often.
Or does that create the fight?
Sometimes, but sometimes it's you say something, but you're not meaning what you're saying.
Oh.
And then when I react to what you've said and you go, oh, shit, that's not actually what I meant. I meant this. And I'm like, oh, okay, but that's not what you said.
Yeah, I know. And then I don't remember what I said, and then I get even more confused, and that's when I flee.
You've lost. By that point, you're out.
Terrible.
You've lost. Game over.
Terrible debater.
The beast has won in that moment.
Yeah. Brain fog is a good thing for both of us sometimes, because sometimes we forget why we're mad at each other and just be like, why were we mad? It doesn't matter.
COVID worked for us. The COVID brain fog was like, oh, wow.
As well, right? Like, what? I don't remember you doing that. You're fine, babe. Don't worry.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Do you find, is there a common conflict that you find in your practice that constantly comes up with couples, and what is it?
If I can take that question one step before it, there's something that causes conflict all the time, and that's fear. So it doesn't matter what we're fighting about, there's fear behind it. Okay. Otherwise, we will not go into fight or flight. We won't be triggered. We won't be alarmed. So there's always something that frightens us. Now, it's not universal what frightens us. Sometimes it is, yes. If a big beast came through the door right now, we'd all start fleeing. But it could be about money. But what does money represent? For us, it represents security. Or for others, it might represent keeping away from poverty in the sense of, I spend lots of money so I don't feel poor. So there's a fear of getting in contact with feeling that you don't have money. So it's what things mean to us. Also, another area of conflict is if someone calls us a name, like a partner might say, you've been really lazy. Well, why do we take such offence to that? Have we been lazy? But we don't often question it. So it's our self-identity, how we're viewing. You've offended me in some way by calling me something, so much so I don't even want to look at whether it's true or not, and then we'll fight. So there's lots of things that we fight over, but behind it is fear. What does it mean if my partner thinks I'm not perfect? What does it mean if they think I'm inadequate, unworthy? Where does that go? But that's the fear. But we're not talking about that in the moment. We'll talk about why someone didn't, take the rubbish from one room to another. That's not really the point. It's what's behind it. So we have to keep asking, what's the fear?
Right.
And because often we look at our fights and they're so stupid.
Yep.
Over absolute nonsense. But it's not nonsense because it's frightened us in some way, and that's dictated by what's happening in childhood.
And so is that looking at that fear? Is that part of? You talk in your book about blind spots. Do you help couples identify blind spots? And is that like would you sit there and go, okay, let's dig into what you're fearful of, because that would create a blind spot? Is that something? Is that an example of that?
That is spot on. So there's several blind spots that we have. One of the blind spots is that we don't know what has been encoded in us.
Yeah.
We'll know when we see it with our partner, but we'll think it's them doing the wrong thing by us, but that's
yep.
the bit that's about us. It's like a big mirror. Imagine they're a big mirror saying, oh, you're insecure about X, Y, and Z. Yeah. So that's a blind spot. I call it the relational template. What is in our relational template is what's been encoded since we were young, and it's often formed by the age of 18 months. What kind of person we're going to be relationally, which is pretty serious stuff. That is a real blind spot. I don't know how I've been encoded unless I try and work it out through my behaviour, through my narrative, what's in my head. Another one are my triggers. They're a complete blind spot. I think it's all my partner being a complete twit in a relationship, but it's actually not. So why do I get upset when he does X, Y, and Z, whatever that is? We all have those. Another blind spot is our defence mechanisms. And these are things like, what do I do when I don't like the reality of my partner? How do I react? So do I go into denial and I start pushing everything he says back? Or do I repress information? Do I project things onto him? So if he's like the one with the lazy example, if I get told that I'm lazy, do I then try and project something onto him about how lazy he is, or try and shame him in a way? Oh, you know when you missed the toilet seat that time. And so it's like we're doing a shame switch. So these are ego defence mechanisms, and we've got a whole host of them. You know, that kind of splitting, black and white thinking. That's another defence mechanism. And we need to know what our flavour of defence mechanisms are, because we use certain ones, but we don't know we're doing them. They're unconscious. They're a real blind spot because they're also part of our fight or flight response. What are we doing with information that we can't handle? And the real one on top of all of this is that binds it together is distress intolerance. We don't know that we can't tolerate things. So whatever it is that sets you off, that in that moment, you've got distress intolerance. Sorry, I'm not meaning you two, all of us. We all have distress intolerance about certain areas.
Yeah.
And if we don't know why we can't tolerate it, we just think it's the problem of the universe. Why isn't the world the way I want it to be?
Yeah.
But it's because we can't cope with it. We can't cope with reality. And that's because we haven't learnt to be more resilient. And that is often done by the age of 18 months as well. So much happens in those early years that we can't even imagine that sets us up for life.
So is that incumbent on the parents?
Sadly, yes. I mean, absolutely. If I knew how much responsibility there was in the emotional raising of children, I would newer have had them.
Really?
And I think a lot of us wouldn't. It's just too much responsibility once we know it.
So it is incumbent on the parents. So do you deal with that in your book? And I imagine you do.
I do actually.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot on it. It's all a body of research called attachment theory, and this is where this figure of 12 to 18 months comes from, because what they've found is there are particular ways that children bond to their parents. There are predictable patterns. And these patterns are things like, are they securely attached to their parents? And 60% of us are securely attached. And what that means is that they can rely on their parents to be there for them enough. Yeah, it doesn't mean we're not looking for perfection here. There's no perfection. They're enough, changing nappies in a timely enough manner, responding to cries well enough, not being too hungry all the time. So occasionally, but someone who's watching out to check that it's a receptiveness. Are you there? Are you attuned? So if they're attuned enough, the child usually develops resilience and they're attached in a secure way. But if they're not getting that, and not to parent blame or shame, the parents might have financial distress, or they might be chronically ill, or they may have a mental illness. Whatever it is, parents can be preoccupied with the adult stuff, but a little child, a baby, doesn't know what's going on. They've got no idea. And so they are on the receiving end, because they're so wholly dependent on their parent, of stuff that they don't really understand. So their cries might be left that bit too long, or they can't get their parents' attention. And then they become insecurely attached, and they'll either become very clingy, very anxious in that way, and they'll try and, like a koala, there's kids that want to be like a little koala to their parents all the time. And then there are others that, if that strategy doesn't work, they do what I call the fortress, and they become very avoidant. These kids can look really independent, but it's not a real independence, it's a pseudo-independence. It's a strategy to deal with anxiety.
Yep.
And then there are other children who are even more traumatised, and they have unusual behaviours like having dazed facial expressions. They rock backwards and forwards, or they'll just keep collapsing at their parents' feet. They don't know how to bond to their parent. They don't trust them enough. I'm not saying any of this to blame parents, because, parenting's a hard gig, but it is a huge responsibility to think about, am I there enough? What's happening for my child? How are they bonded to me?
Right.
And how do I get help if they're not securely attached?
And there must, I can only imagine, I work in schools, and I can only imagine with the difference between what I've seen too is that because the cost of living is so high, we are having both parents working because they've got to pay rent, they've got to pay mortgage. So often little ones are in daycare very early, or not with mum or dad. And then then we add, we talk about screens so much on this podcast. Then you add the screens, and that's something that I've watched so much is, again, and I know we're not mum or dad blaming it all here, but just at the park, mum's pushing the swing, but she's also on the phone at the same time, or pushing the pram and she's on the phone.
And what about the kid on the screen too?
Kids on the screen, and it just breaks my heart. Because I just think, you don't get that time back again. And it's such a beautiful time to be with your child. When they're way older, or when you're on your own, get your phone out. But it's it's more common than not that I'm seeing that happen these days. So that surely is affecting that attachment. Yeah,
massively, because it says whatever's here
is more
important than you. Yeah.
Well,
and
quite simple, isn't it, when you put it like that?
Yeah.
And it's not the message we really want to give our child. But
of course.
We don't know how our child is going to join the dots of their own experience.
Yeah.
And they don't have the full range like we do, like, mummy's an 18-month-old, 12-month-old doesn't know mummy and daddy are distressed about their finances. They just feel neglected.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy. And it's that bit it's the joining of the dots.
Yeah.
that we can't control as parents unless we've got our mind on it. This is going back to relationships, all relationships, being mindful of what are we conveying about how important they are.
So take that child 24 years down the track. How would that behavior look in relationship then? They haven't had that strong attachment with their parents. You know, they haven't had their needs attended to in some ways. What does that look like now as a 26-year-old in a relationship?
Yeah, and it's 26, 36, 46.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. I mean, the question's spot
and I would
on.
imagine it's not just with your partner, it's with your friends, it's with your co-worker, it's everywhere,
It's
right?
exactly the same. It is exactly the same, except at work we might mask it more and not reveal our inverted commas crazy bits, you know, because they are. And so we'll hide it, and sometimes with friends we'll hide it, but it slips out. So how does it operate? So I was talking before about the clingy and the preoccupied children. So if they're very clingy and preoccupied with their parents, thinking, I've got to get close to mum, and unconsciously thinking it too, all these manoeuvres, then they're going to do something similar with their partner. But their partner isn't going to be wired the same way as them. So if they're looking for someone who can meet their cling in a particular way and preoccupation, that'll feel good. But if that partner has their own mind and intentions and desires in the world, they're going to feel quite dropped, the one who's clingy. I see it like someone having a retractable tape measure in their back pocket. So it never leaves them, that clinginess, unless they work it out of their system like through therapy and other strategies. But they've got this retractable tape measure. It's always there going, are you too far away from me? And then often they'll tell their partner, you did this wrong, because it makes them feel insecure. So there's the fear. It all comes back to, why do I feel unsafe? So the clinginess is an anxious reaction. So you put that on a partner at the age of 26, they're going to be thinking, can you stop this? I'm feeling quite suffocated.
Yeah.
Or why am I always getting it wrong for you?
Yeah.
But it's because the tape measure is always there saying you're too far away. Sometimes I feel cozy, like when we're all snuggled up, and other times it's too far and the anxiety comes out, and then that will trigger fight or flight.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it's always there. I know, we're complex.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so complicated. And it's
complex.
like, because we are the product of parents and our partners are the product of parents. So you only multiply, it's a multiplier effect. And if you plug in this idea that your partner is going to be like your parents or like a brother and sister who were raised the same way as you were, completely unfair. And where do you take that? In the book, are you offering solutions to people?
Yeah.
In this one, because this is great. I mean, because I can hear, I'm listening to the podcast and I'm going, oh, they're talking about me. Oh my God, I've got my tape measure out.
I already feel very seen myself. She's already nailed me. So.
Exactly. And then I'm like, yeah. So what now? What do I do? Because I want to be better. I want to be better at relationship. I want with my friends, my lovers, my parents, my kids. Really hard not to go into self-flagellation beat-up mode right now. So are you offering solutions?
Absolutely. So what it is a journey. So in the book, it is a journey of self-discovery. So everything we've been talking about, trying to understand how your relational template operates, understanding your triggers, understanding your defense mechanisms, it's all in the book. And there's some activities to work through as you go so that you start to form a picture of, why am I like this? And then there are some strategies in the final chapter for how to, if you need some help, joining it up with therapy. So that's the mind. And then there's also the mind-body connection stuff, which is all around breath work and mindfulness. I'm a huge believer in working on joining up the mind and body. We are one organism. We can't just cut it off at the head and say, I'm done now. We have to be able to manage it all inside of ourselves.
Yeah, the body doesn't lie, does it? So it's often the place that I go to when I can't figure out, what am I feeling? And I'm going, okay, it's my stomach's in knots, so that knows I'm anxious. So what am I anxious about? So I go backwards into the body to find out where I'm actually feeling is often
That's brilliant.
the best way to go for me. So
that is the answer.
Yeah.
Often. It's in the body. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And you know when you feel off. You know you don't feel right, and it's like there's something going on. I don't feel good in my body, and it's so often the mental load.
Yeah, I mean, our training, if you'd say it was training, was that
Or therapy.
It was that the body will tell you before you think it.
Yeah.
The body will guide you, and that will create the thought that this is what's happening. And when you were talking about that before, and the flight or flight, and your heart rate goes up, or you're short of breath, I meant to ask you about that. I didn't want to cut you off, but I was like, so you must be into body signals.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always thinking about what's just happened. Then how do I calm myself down?
Yeah.
Without it, I'm a firecracker.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to spray my sparks on people.
It's true.
It's like a bottle rocket.
Sometimes we do need that fire, though, don't we? Like, we do need to get, like, I've gotten more in touch with my anger as I've gotten older because I'm a runner and been a nice girl for so long. It's taken me a while to actually get to my anger.
Al's not just a runner. Like, if you put the runner down the hallway, if you have a runner there, she's often said that I'm the doormat. You cover that in your thing, but you're a doormat and a runner.
And a runner.
And a hallway runner. And a runner now, we found out.
I'm a whole bottom floor of a house. But I do it really nicely, and like I make sure I try not to bump into anyone at the same time.
As you're running out.
Yeah. So
No roadkill.
Just to finally, that's right. Just to finally get to my anger. And sometimes it's like, sometimes it comes out inappropriately. I can tell that. But sometimes it comes out because it's been bottled for so long. So as we get older, are those the way we have conflict, does it become more exaggerated as well, or are we getting ease? Or sometimes also couples that have been together. I can't look at my husband right now.
32 years.
Things that didn't used to bother you now really, really bother you. That didn't.
Oh, like what, Ali?
God, shall I just leave the room while you guys have a little session?
I'm asking
got my
for a
checkbook
friend.
out.
I'm asking
Lissy.
for a friend. Like what are those things? Yeah, like what happens there? Like if there's more conflict around things, it's like it's never used to bother you. Why does this bother you now?
Absolutely.
Is that just like a bottling up of stuff?
Unless there's actually a real change in your partner, we have to ask, am I using one of my regressed defense mechanisms, regression, which is complaining and whining and blaming.
Yep.
So maybe there has been a change in the partner, but I think we really do need to look inside ourselves first and say, am I off? Am I off kilter in some way? What's happening for me?
Yeah.
Instead of just automatically thinking it's our partner. But of course we're going to think it's them, because if we don't know that it's us, it has to be the person next to us.
And it's so much
I was
easier.
fine before you came in the room.
That's right.
And now I'm not.
I was
so
happy.
Of course we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that we're going to do that. Why would we think it's us?
Yeah.
Why would we think that our own thoughts upset us?
Yeah. That's so true.
Are you married?
I'm partnered.
You're partnered.
Yeah.
And how long's that been going on?
That's 6 years.
Okay.
I was married, though, for 17 years, together 19.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were fortunate.
And this was going through this might help me with this question. So you can marry for 17 years. Do you ever tell, when you're counselling, do you ever tell couples that you're done? You really should walk away?
Occasionally.
Yeah.
Really rarely, because I hold so much hope for humans.
Yeah.
And our ability to develop.
Yeah.
I just think we need to have time to do that. But I have worked with certain couples, probably less than a handful, that I've actually said you need to separate through the years because it's actually too destructive. And then if I find myself worrying about them in between sessions too much and for too long, I really use that information, because in general I don't worry about people even if they're in distress, because I do know that they're going to get better when they do the work.
Right.
But for those couples who don't, they just can't find that bridge to each other and it's just ongoing and the kids are in it.
Yeah.
I actually become an advocate for the children because I think this is doing so much damage, and that links very much with what we were talking about attachment theory before.
Yeah.
So if children are exposed to so much conflict, that's terrifying for them.
Yes.
They can feel so much dread, anxiety. They don't know what to do. In that moment, they haven't got either parent available to them if they need something, and they're terrified they're going to separate a lot of the time. So if kids are kind of sitting in that for too long with no improvement, and I mean quite a long time, but I do start to suggest it.
Yeah.
We've got, you would know better than anyone, the rate of domestic violence has just gone through the roof and continues to rise, unfortunately. Is there any help that you can give couples that are engaged in that kind of severe conflict?
Yeah, it's a really important one. In the book, I do address this because there is that line between what's conflict and what's domestic violence.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And it's such a blurry line sometimes, and I wish I could just make it a really clear line. I do run through it in the chapter, one of the chapters, because and go through what is actually not what we're talking about in relation to conflict. So with anyone who contacts me about what I would consider domestic violence and abuse, I actually tell them to go and contact the organisation Respect straight away, because I think it's really helpful. If there is a couple that's concerned about it, I say they should both speak to them, and the person who instigates it is often the person who's had a harder time with it. They can find out, well, is this really crossing the threshold? What do I do? And for others who might be instigating it and being very unaware that they're a perpetrator, not everyone knows they are, then they can speak to them as well and have that clarified and get some tips and some support for them as well. Because like I was saying, and going off with fighting, my language isn't great all the time. Other people aren't as well. But there is a difference between what's not violence, sorry, that's not violence, but what's happening in the moment in a fight. In that moment, or whether there is a power imbalance in general.
Yeah.
And domestic violence, there's a pattern that's more all-consuming than what happens in a fight with a couple.
Yeah, sure.
Because we might have a fight, you might not like each other for a moment, but then after that you kind of get back together and you're both in the relationship more equally. If that's not happening, it really would want to question something around the power imbalance and why it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Lissy, you've written a great book. Cannot wait to get my hands on it. I'm sure I'm speaking for Alison as well, as we consciously and unconsciously reset. Relationship
day
reset.
in and day out.
Just what do you love about your job?
Oh, wow. Great question. It's a privilege. I am the fly on the wall that everyone wants to be about relationships, but I love the fact that people develop. And so for me, like I was saying before, I don't really feel that upset when people are in distress. I start to feel quite moved when people develop.
Yeah,
and so what might seem like a really tiny development for a couple where they resolve one argument together when they've never been able to do it before, that for me can bring me to little tears, because it shows how much work they've done and that their wiring is changing, that they're able to do that. And that for me is just such a privilege to see people and help people improve their lives in that way.
Yeah.
So it is such privileged work. I feel joyful every day that I can help people.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you know, we are huge supporters of therapy. I mean, my goodness, without it, we always say we wouldn't be together. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But that message that you give is so important for people, because there's often a lot of shame for people going to therapy.
I
and
know.
The fact that you're both speaking about it, and often for men, there's a lot of shame. So the fact that you're both doing this together, I think you can't underestimate what you're doing.
Yeah, well,
and
even
the help
if you can't,
provide.
Yeah, and even if you can't do it together, just to go alone,
Yeah.
for dudes out there, just go and get it off your chest. I mean, that's what I always think of problem shared's a problem halved. And if you're talking to an expert who can give you some tips, especially for the fix-it fellas out there, we like to fix things, and it's great to have some tips to integrate into your own behaviour and thinking. It works really well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you so much for coming in.
It is an absolute
Lissy.
pleasure. Thank you both for having me. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Great to have Lissy in the studio.
I just could have talked with Lissy. I had lots more questions ruminating in my mind. It's why we started the podcast, that I love relationships. I love love. I love it when people have healing through relationships. So I'm so on board with her about that. You know, when you asked her that beautiful question, I'm so glad you asked that about what do you love about your work. It was so great. And her face lit up like a sun. It was gorgeous.
Didn't it? Because it wasn't like, oh, well, she's going to make something up.
No, you could. This is her passion.
No,
Yeah.
you're right. She was fantastic. Yeah, a bunch of questions. We might have to do a part 2 with Lissy.
Lissy, so good.
Lissy Abrahams, her book is Relationship Reset. It's great because there's solutions in there for us. So I'm getting the feeling that she's going to lay out scenarios, which we certainly Well, I know I related to a whole bunch. As you said, she's nailed you.
Oh, yeah.
She
I
nailed
can
me
hear
several
myself a lot.
times.
Yeah.
So good. All right, well, that's enough from us. We'll see you on the next Separate Bathrooms.
Thanks for listening. Bye.